Hi everyone, this is an attachment to a blog post I put together about hacking HubSpot's lead scoring system. And one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of people struggle with when it comes to HubSpot lead scoring is that it's just so fundamentally different than other lead scoring systems. And that mostly stems because HubSpot is really reliant upon data existing in fields. So whenever you're in HubSpot, and you're even considering setting up lead scoring system for the first time, or you're planning out lead scoring systems and trying to get consensus on a team for what you're later going to put into HubSpot, always remember that HubSpot wants to see almost always the data that you're using as the criteria for a particular field in that lead scoring system, in fields to be able to power the lead scoring system. Because if it's not in those fields, unlike other lead scoring systems, which may be basing things off particular events like form submissions or downloads or email opens or stuff like that, that is really based on behavior, HubSpot's really looking for what you have in a field. So it doesn't exist in a field, you maybe sometimes can do it, but it's mostly going to push you towards that end. So let's dive in right now. So what you'll want to do is go up to your cogwheel in the top right-hand corner of HubSpot to be able to get to your settings. And then we're going to be working in properties, and specifically, again, to keep in mind when we talk about objects are in HubSpot are really fundamentally focused on contacts and companies, also deals, but today we're going to focus on contacts. And then specifically, and this is a little bit varied, like most, I think if you look at like ActiveCampaign or Pardot, like you have lead scoring systems that feel like they're broken out and they're a little bit robust. I would argue that this kind of feels like a little bit of an add-on. So you're going to want to go to properties under contact settings and then look for a property called, you just type in HubSpot and then look for HubSpot score. And granted, if you are in, I've seen some versions of HubSpot not have access to this because HubSpot's really hard and fast about here's the level of HubSpot you're at, whether that be Marketing Hub, Enterprise, or Sales Enterprise, or Service, or whatever else like that, and then not having access to this. But generally speaking, if you're on a paid version of HubSpot, you should have access to this. It's a default field. It's not something that you need to create. And so let's click and dive into HubSpot score. So, and we've got a couple of rules here. I'm gonna clear these out and we're gonna save this just to be able to take a look at it. So, and let me do it again. I'm not the biggest fan of this particular interface for scores per se. So HubSpot score is essentially lead scoring in HubSpot, right? You essentially are adding scores for either positive attributes or negative attributes associated with a particular contact. So anything that we want to add and say like, hey, this person is based on, and I'm a big fan of something that's sort of definitive for a lot of B2B businesses in terms of decision-making power and expertise and focus area, something like job title. And we'll use that example a lot today because I think it really illustrates the point I'm trying to make in terms of HubSpot fields and what exists and what's sort of possible and things like that. So what HubSpot is great at, again, have data in the field, then it's really, really simple. So any situation in which you have data from form submissions, or you have a chat bot that you're collecting it with through HubSpot or another tool, or data augmentation to where let's say you're using like Crunchbase or another third-party database to be able to like match contact records, and you're pulling in attributes from there, like that stuff works really well. So like, and I think that is really what the system is intended for. It's not intended to like this other example that I talk about with engagement, which we'll kind of talk about in a moment. So let's do an example of that. So let's say that I know a particular job title equates to having like a high likelihood of closing, right? In this case, we'll just make up and say that somebody who has the word operations, their job title, tends to be the ideal candidate that we're looking for in terms of marketing qualified leads or sales qualified leads. So in this case, what we're going to do is, let me refresh. What we're going to do is we're going to basically create a new positive attribute set. And this set will be defining the criteria for the number of points we want to have in for this particular criteria. So in this case, we're going to look at contact properties. And what we're going to look for is job title. It's a default field in HubSpot, so you should already have that there. And then, so like in this particular example, like I'm a big fan of searching individual strings. Like it's rare that it's rare that anybody in reality that their job title always matches what you have in your mind. Like some people are using specialist or marketing manager or operations manager or developer or whatever it may be. It's not always going to match what your ideal customer is, and everybody has like a little bit of variation on what those things are. So I like to say if contains any. In this case, we're looking for somebody who works in like operations. So this might be somebody who is, maybe somebody who's at the C level who has operations in their title, maybe somebody who's at the specialist or marketing level, or specialist or director level, but they have operations in their title. And whenever we see that come through, we're going to set the number of points we want. In this case, 10. Again, random example, doesn't matter in this particular case. We're going to hit save. And that's a big tip I've seen on this. I don't know why it does this for me particularly, but it seems like if I don't, it's very easy to go in with your lead scoring and start setting up all of these values and not realize you don't have this refreshed or you don't have these values saved into the HubSpot criteria. So I just recommend after every time that you add a negative set or a positive set, just hit save. Like it's so easy to do, and then it just pops you right back in. So one of the key aspects to think about this, and I don't think that most people will struggle with this particular issue. Super simple. Job title. If the job title contains operations, then add plus 10 to their HubSpot score. Again, that's just HubSpot's name for lead score. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't speak to anything about the context of how that data got there. So whether this person submitted a form on a guide and job title was one of the required form fields and they put in their job title and those operations, or if I manually created a contact for a particular person that day and their job title contained operations, if I'm using a chatbot, if I'm using another integration that exists with HubSpot, it's just looking for that value in that field. It's not speaking to the context in which it got there, and it's not speaking to the context of anything more than you're putting in the individual rules there. So something to keep in mind. The other big caveat, which a lot of people struggle with when it comes to thinking about what we're describing here, which is essentially some aspect of demographic demographic information, field information related to a contact in particular, is that instead of being additive, so in a lot of lead scoring systems, this exact same rule would simply add 10 points to their HubSpot score, and that 10 points would sort of exist until the end of time, until you manually made some alteration to their lead score, whether they got more points through other rules, whether they had points taken away through negative attributes. Maybe there's some kind of manual operation that you would run to be able to alter that score over time. But these lead scoring rules do not work and do not fundamentally have the same behavior that you would expect in workflows in HubSpot. So if you do a lot of work in workflows are essentially a small program that's running most of the time, typically once. They're sequential. So somebody starts at the top, they're doing a series of actions, and then they're ultimately computing on the spitting out the other end with whatever result they have. In fact, most HubSpot workflows by default won't let contacts re-enroll unless you allow them the option of doing so. So this is like a common problem for people that are saying, wait, this contact said, they submitted this form and the workflow is not working. I don't have, I'm not sure why that's working. And it's usually because of that re-enrollment rule. And it's designed to prevent people from getting unnecessary emails or for executing the same actions, which may produce like kind of a weird interaction, especially if you're triggering out email to a contact. And so most of the time when you run HubSpot rules, they run and then they're sort of done. Like they don't, they're not looping around unless you specifically design them in that way. The difference is that you think that lead scoring would work in the same way, that once the 10 points are added here for this particular job title, they would exist in perpetuity. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it works at all. What happens is that as soon as a contact no longer meets the criteria for getting this 10 points, so let's say we had somebody who worked in operations and we had that, and they lead score HubSpot saw that they had a job title and it had operations in there. It assigned them the 10 points. Let's say a month later, they come back to the site, they fill out a guide, and they update their job title. They switch companies, they got a promotion, whatever else like that. HubSpot actually takes those 10 points away, which is really strange. It's not the way that most lead scoring systems work, is that like typically those 10 points would just be added because they met the criteria once and then they're done. But instead, one thing to keep in mind with HubSpot lead scoring, with the HubSpot score rules, is that they continually kind of run and check for those conditions. So it's only for when you meet all of the positive attributes or negative attributes that you're going to get, the score computed as of once. But it's not very, it's a little bit odd because it's sort of the opposite behavior for most HubSpot workflows. So something to keep in mind is that, like, even if you tried to do, and I've tried to do this in the past, this is just how I found that out. So one of the things that we'll talk about is iteration and increment lead scoring based on like engagement. So based on like if we want to add like the number of a point for every time that HubSpot sees that someone's opened a marketing email. That's not possible in HubSpot. And I thought at a certain point it could be hacked together, which was, there's examples of people creating workflows to set a value in a form, adding a delay in a workflow, and then clearing the value out, thinking that, that will effectively work in the same way that you have, lead scoring here, those 10 points, but that's not the way it works, because as soon as you clear out that value, so if we had a workflow that cleared out this value for their job title after they set it, HubSpot would actually subtract those points because it no longer meets the criteria, right? So something that I think is a little bit strange, and a lot of people complain about that, and I think that it's kind of justified and kind of goofy, but it is what it is. So again, HubSpot's great when it comes to situations like this. Got something in a field, does this person have these particular values in the fields? If so, add or subtract points, right? Super simple stuff. Doesn't speak to anything about how that data got there. It's totally fine whether it came through an API or an integration or something else like that. So the other situation, I kind of cover this a little bit more in the blog post attached to this, is really thinking about engagement. And so one of the challenges that exist in HubSpot, again, in comparison to something like, I think ActiveCampaign is a good example, to where they have specific lead scoring abilities that relate to engagement. And when I say engagement, what we're looking for is that typically lead scoring kind of falls into these like kind of two big camps, right? Like you've got like the idea of like personas or attributes about the person, their job title, their age, the budget they have for a project, their location, the countries they operate in, the type of services they're looking for, attributes that are sort of intrinsic to who they are, a lot of times based on a form submission or some other operation to be able to gather data. HubSpot's pretty good at that. But where HubSpot falls short is really being able to represent engagement. So there's the idea that you may have the perfect lead, they have the perfect job title, they have tons of money, they are ready to make a purchasing decision. Maybe you like ask them in the form field, like, how soon are you looking to start your project or complete your project or whatever else like that. So you have that situation, they meet all the criteria, but then they may not be particularly engaged with your brand, which is what the engagement portion is designed to measure, to be able to say, like, how many emails are they opening? How often are they visiting the site? Are they visiting like a demo page or a pricing page or a sales page, but we're not seeing the corresponding form submission for that, or maybe they submitted on a guide or some kind of piece of inbound content, previously, and we have that data and we know they're in the system, but they never submitted anything in terms of scheduling a call or contacting sales or going through like our self-checkout or self-service portal or whatever else like that, or store or e-commerce shop, whatever. And so HubSpot's really terrible at that part. So, and I want to give an example of this. So if we go to positive attributes, let's say that we want to again, going back to the example of something simple, let's say that we wanted to add a lead score, add a points for every time that somebody opens an email. And so what HubSpot gives you is the option to add a point to individual emails, which is it's just like trying to like dig your way out of a hole with like the tiniest little bucket of sand. Like you would have to make, instead of being able to say if any email is open, then add a point, what you get in HubSpot is really just being able to say one individual email. So if you're an organization that frequently sends out emails, you would literally have to make a rule that would create the conditions in which they would get that. So that may be really relevant for some organizations. Maybe there's a like a particularly critical email that does particularly well, that's like done on like a quarterly basis, where it kind of becomes this idea of like cornerstone content that exists out there and is so critical that, if people open it, that like you want to do lead scoring. But that's not even this. It's not even a class of email or a category of email, because what you'll have to do is that, like, let's say that you do have that important email. Every time you send it, you essentially have to make that rule, which is so granular that it kind of becomes useless in terms of relevancy, is kind of my big argument for most organizations. So like for this particular email, like we're putting our criteria is that the contacts open the email, and then we can add, 12 points or whatever else like that. And we're going to hit save again. Always please click save you a lot of heartache. Like we can add points to there, and we can add additional rules. Like we can go in and add additional rules to all of these marketing emails. But something to keep in mind is that you will run, so we're going to click. So in this case, if they opened either one of these emails that were probably sent out at like a fixed period of time. So this may have been sent out last year, right? Like it's just that email. It's just that instance of email. So one thing to keep in mind is that most HubSpot accounts are limited to 100 rules for these lead scoring systems. So, like it's different in the context of which we could say, hey, we want to create, do some type of iteration on, being able to say, well, every time that somebody, submits clicks on a particular email, we want to assign them a lead score overall, and just say any email, it doesn't matter. That's not what this is. And so like those 100 rules really get restrictive when you think about if you have to go in and make particular rules for each individual email. So I'm not the biggest fan of doing that, and I don't often use it in a lot of a lot of the organizations that I manage and things like that. So the other situation, so that's like a very, very terrible way to do kind of engagement measurement and things like that. So the only other method that we have beyond this is, again, to go back to the fields. And so there are some defaults fields related to contacts that are built right into the core of HubSpot. So what we can do is look at contact properties, and then just as an example, there's a few different ones, right? So if we look for marketing, and then we go down to, we can actually see that each, as a default property, actually HubSpot does record the number of marketing emails opened, which I think is closer. It's not perfect for a reason I'll go over in a second, but it's definitely closer to what we're after in terms of being able to increment lead scores over time. So let's go to, rarely am I using equal to on these. You're essentially treating this like a number because it is greater than or equal to, and then we're going to say 5, this is very classic HubSpot example of how to be able to do that. And the idea is that we are setting up regular increments and checks, and I'm just making up a lead score. Don't pay attention to these. We're saying, hey, when the number of marketing emails opens is greater than or equal to 5, then give them 10 points, right? So it gets us a little bit closer. There's nothing special about the number 5 or the lead score values I have here. It's just really showing an example of how to be able to use this field. But you can probably see the obvious problem in this is that, like, it's great for assigning attributes when somebody opens more than 5 marketing emails. But guess what? After 5 emails, it's not going to do anything else. So again, we have to make another rule to be able to make this work. So again, we're going to go to add a new set, and then we're going to go to contact properties, and then we're going to again search for marketing, and then we're going to go to marketing emails open. In this case, we're going to say is greater than or equal to 10, and then we're going to apply a filter, and then we're going to give them, let's say, just another arbitrary 10 points, right? So in this case, once they're marketing emails for the contact record, greater than or equal to 5, they're going to get 10 points. And now there'll be some amount of email that they'll open in between 5 and 10. Those essentially they're counted, but they're not getting individual points for each email. The next check happens when there's 10. So you can see that, like, as you want this to be, if you want this to be more incremental, like, you could literally set up rules for saying, we could literally go in and say, if marketing emails is greater than 1, update filter. If marketing emails opened is greater than 2, you could literally set up rules for each individual quantity that you want to have. But of course, the problem is those 100 rules, you're going to run out of them. So the easiest way to do this is to try to set up regular increments where you're at least checking in on those particular contacts. And again, that's not a perfect system. Like, there will be people that will kind of fit in between that gray area, and people that might be stuck at non-emails who aren't getting the next points, or people stuck at 4 emails that aren't getting the next points. And you don't have to stick with the 5s. You can do 2s or 3s or whatever, 10 or 20. It really depends on the volume of email that you send, and really the attributes of what those, what is most relevant to your contacts and things like that. So the other big factor, and I discussed this kind of a little bit and give a link to, I think, a pretty relevant discussion in the HubSpot community, which is the idea of, like, how relevant these engagement metrics are. So one of the things that HubSpot is that's an inherent flaw, even in the example that I give here with the marketing emails that are opened versus the number of emails not opened, so on and so forth, is that it's really not paying attention to time. So we don't have the ability to be able to refine by a particular time period. So in other words, what eventually happens is that with this rule, like, let's go back to like our 5s and 5 here for checks. Actually, this is supposed to be 10. So let's say that we have a contact from summer that opened 5 marketing emails back in June, and then we have a contact from this fall that opened 5 emails as well. So those people would end up with the same lead score. So the idea of discounting time is, I think, a particularly relevant topic, because the engagement stuff, opening emails 6 months ago is likely is not relevant as somebody opening up 6 emails this week. Which that would be a lot of emails to open. But I think the point is same, is that, like, HubSpot really doesn't have a mechanism for the idea of time decay, or the idea of discounting time or discounting lead scoring points the older they become. So, like, everybody just kind of exists with these lead points in perpetuity. And so it becomes really hard to discern, like, kind of noise from just, you see the number of points that go up. Somebody may have a really high lead score, but they may have a really high lead score because they opened a bunch of emails and then they went out of business like 6 months ago, right? And so being able to kind of suss those things out is really something to keep in mind with engagement. And because sort of a combination of that, we don't really have a way to, like, truly increment, and we don't have a way to like, decay those scores based on engagement. So, like, ActiveCampaign, like, has some specific features that allow it to kind of, like, and points to fall off, because you do want points to be relevant to the time period that you're looking at them in, versus just kind of hanging out old, dusty, leads or contacts that opened a bunch of emails, 2 years ago, aren't going to be as relevant, but haven't visited the website since, are going to have the same lead score as leads today. So really being able to try to account for that, like, in your lead scoring model, is, I think, something hugely important, because along with your demographic information, to where we know these are the ideal contacts versus the number of engagement attributes associated with a particular contact, like, really being able to balance those out, I think is, like, a tough challenge to do. But I think it's worthwhile to have some system of lead scoring, especially if you're using HubSpot by itself, and really being able to, kind of suss out, who's relevant and who is not, and then take it from there. Feel free to subscribe or to let me know if you have any questions about lead scoring. I think it's worthwhile. I think that HubSpot's kind of particularly bad at a lot of lead scoring in comparison to other either ECRMs or sales systems or marketing automation options that exist out there. There's a lot of discussion about this, and I think that you'll likely and hopefully continue to see HubSpot iterate on these values. But it does get you, 70% of the way there, and I think more importantly, it gives some visibility to, it gives some color to taking life cycle stages. And I'm a big advocate of, if you're not using life cycle stages, especially in HubSpot, you're not doing it right. So using those life cycle stages in combination of lead scoring gets you closer to finding out really what you want to know, which is who you should be engaging with and who you should be approaching, especially in the context of not seeing direct ask and not seeing form submissions that should happen for a particular group. And so in that sense, I still think it's worthwhile. I'm still not happy with some of the limitations of it. And I think that, I think that we should all try to have better clarity about who our actual lead scoring targets are and things like that. So thanks, guys. Let me know if you have any questions.